The sun was just peeking over the horizon, casting a golden hue across the sleepy little corner of downtown. Isabella Miller adjusted her apron, the smell of freshly brewed coffee already filling the air as she set up her station. Her life was a whirlwind of late-night coding sessions and early morning shifts, a delicate balance of ambition and necessity. But she never complained. She had dreams big enough to eclipse the exhaustion, to one day code her way into a tech revolution. She glanced up as the cafe bell jingled, signaling the first customer of the day. In walked a man who seemed out of place among the regulars. His tailored suit and polished shoes were stark against the worn wooden floors and mismatched chairs. Yet, there was something disarming about his boyish smile and the way his eyes scanned the menu as if he were in uncharted territory. "Good morning," Isabella greeted with her usual cheer, wiping her hands on her apron. "What can I get you?" The man hesitated, his expression caught between confusion and determination. Good morning. What do you recommend for someone who doesn't drink coffee but desperately needs to wake up?" She smirked, tilting her head. "That depends. How adventurous are you?" "I've been called adventurous, but I'd say out of my depth is more accurate right now," he admitted with a sheepish chuckle. "Matcha latte, extra shot of espresso," she decided, punching the order into the register. "Trust me." As she busied herself behind the counter, he watched her with growing intrigue. There was an effortless grace in her movements, a confidence that belied the humble surroundings. When she handed him the steaming cup, their fingers brushed briefly, and he felt a spark he couldn't quite explain. "Thanks," he said, his voice quieter now. "I'm Daniel, by the way." "Isabella," she replied, her smile genuine. "Let me know if you survive that drink." He chuckled and took a tentative sip. His eyebrows shot up in surprise. "Not bad. Not bad at all." Over the next few weeks, Daniel became a regular. At first, Isabella thought it was the drinks that kept him coming back. He was always asking for her recommendations, after all. But soon, she noticed how his questions grew more personal, how he lingered even after his cup was empty, and how his gaze seemed to hold hers a little longer each time. One rainy afternoon, as the cafe emptied out, Daniel worked up the courage to sit across from Isabella during her break. "You're a tough one to figure out," he said, resting his chin on his hand. "What's a computer engineering student doing working shifts at a coffee shop? Paying tuition, obviously," she teased, taking a sip of her tea. "What about you? What's a guy in a suit doing haunting a place like this?" "Maybe I like the company," he admitted, his tone light but his eyes earnest. "And maybe I'm trying to get away from something. Like the weight of being someone I'm not sure I want to be," he said, surprising them both with his candor. "You ever feel like that?" "Every day," she said softly. "But I think the trick is figuring out who you do want to be. That's what I'm working on." Daniel leaned back, her words lingering in the air between them. There was something magnetic about her, this ordinary girl with extraordinary depth. She made him question the life he'd always taken for granted, the expectations that came with his family's name, and what it meant to live authentically. Over time, their conversations grew deeper, touching on dreams, fears, and the invisible lines that divided their worlds. Isabella challenged him in ways no one else had, and he found himself wanting to be the kind of man she deserved. For her part, Isabella was hesitant at first, wary of how different their lives were. But Daniel's sincerity and respect for her ambitions slowly melted her defenses. One crisp autumn evening, he waited outside the cafe as she locked up. "Let me take you somewhere," he said, his breath visible in the cool air. "Where?" she asked, raising an eyebrow. "Anywhere but here. Let's just be spontaneous." She hesitated, but his hopeful smile was contagious. "Okay," she said, laughing. "But only if I get to pick the music." As they drove through the city, the lines between their worlds began to blur. They were just two souls chasing a moment of freedom, two hearts daring to dream together. And for the first time in a long while, Isabella felt like maybe, just maybe, love could be the foundation for something as enduring as her ambitions. The mansion loomed ahead, its grandiose facade an imposing symbol of everything Isabella didn't belong to. Daniel squeezed her hand as they stepped out of his sleek black car. They'll come around, he assured her, though the tension in his jaw betrayed his confidence. They just need time. Isabella forced a smile, clutching his arm as they entered the gilded foyer. The air was heavy with the scent of roses and old money, and the clicking of Eleanor's designer heels echoed ominously as she approached. Eleanor Bradford, with her perfectly coiffed hair and icy gaze, assessed Isabella with the precision of a jeweler inspecting a counterfeit gem. "So this is her," Eleanor said, her voice like velvet over steel. "Mom, this is Isabella," Daniel said firmly, wrapping an arm around Isabella's waist. "My fiancé." James Bradford, Daniel's father, joined them, exuding an air of effortless authority in his tailored suit. He gave Isabella a curt nod before turning to Daniel. "May I speak with you privately?" Daniel's grip on Isabella tightened. "Anything you have to say to me, you can say in front of Isabella." James raised an eyebrow, his disapproval palpable. "Very well. Son, have you considered what this relationship will do to your reputation? Your position in the company? To our family's legacy?" "Dad, I'm not marrying a resume. I'm marrying a person, a brilliant, driven, kind person," Daniel replied. "Isabella is everything I've been looking for." Eleanor's sharp laugh cut through the room. "Driven? Kind? Those are lovely qualities, dear. But they won't hold up in our world. Do you really think someone with her background can manage the expectations that come with being a Bradford?" Isabella felt her face flush, but she stood tall. "I'm not here to impress you, Mrs. Bradford. I'm here because I love your son and he loves me. That's all that should matter." Eleanor's lips curled into a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Love is a fleeting thing, my dear. It's loyalty to family, tradition, and duty that truly endure." The dinner that followed was a battlefield of veiled insults and icy silences. Eleanor and James dissected Isabella's modest upbringing, her part-time job, and her unpolished table manners. Daniel defended her at every turn, but the rift between him and his parents widened with every word. As they drove back to Isabella's small apartment, Daniel seethed in silence. "I knew they'd be difficult, but I didn't expect them to be so cruel," he finally said. "You didn't deserve that." "I can handle it," Isabella said softly, though her heart ached from the evening's barbs. "But can you?" Daniel pulled the car over and turned to her, his eyes blazing with determination. "I can handle anything as long as I have you. They don't get to decide my life, Isabella. I do." 2 weeks later, they exchanged vows in a small park under a canopy of autumn leaves, surrounded only by a handful of friends and a justice of the peace. There were no extravagant floral arrangements, no guest lists curated by society magazines, just the sincerity of their love and the vows they whispered as the wind carried their promises into the sky. Eleanor and James were conspicuously absent, having made it clear they wouldn't support what they called a reckless decision. Isabella had overheard Eleanor's biting remark to Daniel on the phone, "You're throwing your life away on a girl who will drag you down." But Daniel never wavered. As they signed their marriage certificate, he looked at Isabella with a smile that made her believe they could weather anything. "We'll write our own story," he said, slipping the ring onto her finger. "No one else gets a say." Their honeymoon was a quiet weekend in a lakeside cabin, filled with laughter, stolen kisses, and whispered dreams of the future. But the specter of Daniel's family loomed large. When they returned, Eleanor's disapproval manifested in icy calls to Daniel's office, and James began to pressure him about his responsibilities at the family business. The first real fight of their marriage came one evening when Daniel arrived home late, his tie askew and his face pale with frustration. "They want me to move back into the family estate," he said, collapsing onto the couch. "They think it's time I came to my senses." "And what do you think?" Isabella asked, her voice careful. "I think I love you, and I'll fight for us," he said. But his tired eyes told her the toll it was taking. "They're your parents, Daniel," she said gently. "You can't cut them out forever." "No, but I can show them that my love for you isn't negotiable." He took her hands in his expression fierce. "You're my family now, Isabella. And I won't let anyone take that away." But as the weeks turned into months, the strain on their marriage became undeniable. Daniel juggled the expectations of his family and the demands of his job, while Isabella threw herself into her studies, determined to prove her worth not just to the Bradfords, but to herself. The cracks in their relationship deepened, but so did their resolve. Together, they faced the judgment of the Bradfords, not as individuals, but as a united front. Their love had been forged in adversity, and though the road ahead was uncertain, they clung to the belief that their bond was stronger than the forces trying to pull them apart. Isabella's pregnancy announcement, shared over a simple dinner in their cozy apartment, had been a moment of pure joy for her and Daniel. He had spun her around in excitement, their laughter filling the small space as they dreamed of the life they would build for their child. But they both knew the news would reverberate differently in the gilded halls of the Bradford estate. When Eleanor's name lit up Daniel's phone the next morning, he answered with trepidation. "I heard the news," Eleanor began, her tone uncharacteristically warm. "Congratulations, Daniel. You must bring Isabella to dinner at the estate. It's time we truly welcome her into the family." Isabella had been wary, but Daniel was hopeful. "Maybe the baby changed things," he said. "Maybe this is her way of making peace." The evening at the mansion was surprisingly pleasant. Eleanor greeted Isabella with a warm embrace, her icy demeanor replaced with an effusive charm. She fussed over Isabella, insisting she take the most comfortable seat and eat more of the lavish spread prepared for the occasion. Even James, though reserved, made polite conversation. "You're carrying the next Bradford," Eleanor said, her voice dripping with pride as she poured Isabella a glass of sparkling water. "Your family now, Isabella." Truly. Isabella wanted to believe her, but the sharpness of Eleanor's eyes reminded her of a hawk circling prey. Still, for Daniel's sake, she decided to give her mother-in-law the benefit of the doubt. Over the next few weeks, Eleanor became a regular presence in their lives. She sent a steady stream of expensive baby gifts, embroidered blankets, custom nursery furniture, even a silver rattle engraved with the Bradford crest. She began inviting them to the estate more frequently, claiming she wanted Isabella to feel at home. "Eleanor's really trying," Daniel said one evening as they unpacked yet another gift. "She's not perfect, but I think she's sincere." Isabella nodded, though unease prickled at the back of her mind. Eleanor's sudden transformation felt too good to be true. The turning point came when Eleanor proposed they move into the family mansion. "It's practical," she reasoned over tea one afternoon. "You're pregnant, Isabella. You need rest, comfort, and support. We have staff who can help with everything: the nursery, meals, even a night nurse after the baby is born. You won't have to lift a finger." Daniel was hesitant, but Eleanor's logic was persuasive. "This is about giving your child the best start in life," she insisted. "I want to be there for you, Isabella. For all of you." Reluctantly, they agreed. Within a week, they had moved into a sprawling wing of the mansion. At first, things seemed idyllic. Eleanor doted on Isabella, overseeing every detail of her care. She arranged appointments with top doctors, planned a luxurious baby shower, and even redesigned an entire suite for the baby's nursery. But beneath the veneer of kindness, cracks began to show. Eleanor's suggestions quickly turned into directives. She insisted on approving Isabella's diet, lectured her on the proper way to hold herself, and even began to weigh in on parenting decisions. "Breastfeeding is impractical," Eleanor said one evening as the family sat in the ornate dining room. "A nanny and formula are the best options. You'll thank me when you can sleep through the night." Isabella bristled. "I'd like to try breastfeeding," she said firmly. Eleanor's smile didn't falter, but her tone grew sharper. "You'll change your mind once the baby comes. Trust me." Daniel tried to mediate, but Eleanor's influence was insidious. She began planting seeds of doubt in his mind, subtly questioning Isabella's readiness for motherhood. "She's so young," Eleanor murmured one afternoon as she and Daniel walked through the garden. "And so unprepared. I'm only thinking of the baby's welfare." When Isabella overheard Eleanor on the phone one evening, discussing how she planned to hire a full-time nanny without consulting them, alarm bells rang. "She's trying to take over," Isabella told Daniel later. "She's treating me like I'm a surrogate for her grandchild." You're overthinking it, Daniel said, though he looked uneasy. She's just trying to help. But Eleanor's facade slipped further after the baby was born, a beautiful boy they named Theo. Eleanor was omnipresent, swooping in at the slightest cry, often taking Theo from Isabella under the guise of giving her a break. She began making remarks that cut deep. Motherhood doesn't come naturally to everyone, she said one day, watching as Isabella tried to soothe a fussy Theo. But don't worry. That's why I'm here. Eleanor's true intent became clear when Isabella discovered legal documents in Eleanor's study. They outlined a trust for Theo, naming Eleanor as the primary guardian in the event that Daniel and Isabella were deemed unfit. When Isabella confronted Eleanor, the older woman didn't even bother denying it. "It's my duty to protect this family's legacy," she said coldly. "And I won't let you jeopardize that." Daniel was livid when Isabella showed him the papers. "How could you do this?" he demanded of his mother. "Isabella is Theo's mother, and I won't let you undermine her." But Eleanor was unrepentant. "You're blinded by love," she snapped. "I'm the only one thinking clearly about what's best for this child." The confrontation marked a breaking point. Daniel and Isabella packed their bags that night and left the mansion, vowing never to let Eleanor manipulate their family again. As they drove away, Isabella held Theo close, her heart heavy but resolute. "She underestimated us," Daniel said, his hand on Isabella's. "She thought she could break us, but she only made us stronger." Isabella nodded, a fire burning in her chest. "She may be powerful, but this family is ours. And we'll fight for it." The day started like any other, with Isabella seated at her desk in their temporary apartment. Theo napped peacefully in the next room, and sunlight streamed through the windows as she typed away on her laptop, refining the final touches on her long-term passion project, a software platform she had been developing for years. It was more than a project. It was her future, her proof that she belonged in the tech world, despite the Bradfords' disdain. But that morning, something shifted. A notification pinged on her phone. It was from a popular tech blog she followed, announcing the release of a new product from Bradford Innovations. Curious, she clicked the link. Her blood ran cold. The headline boasted a revolutionary software platform, eerily similar to her own. As she skimmed the article, her stomach churned. The interface, the features, even the tagline, it was all hers. Only the credit was not. The product was attributed to Bradford Innovations, with Daniel listed as a co-creator. Isabella's hands shook as she closed the article and dug deeper. She hacked into the company's private server, her fingers trembling with rage and disbelief. There, she found files dating back months, documents, designs, and even source code she had saved on her personal laptop. Everything had been copied. Stolen. Her heart sank as she realized how. The Bradford mansion. Eleanor's insistence that the staff assist her with everything. Her laptop, so often left unattended when she was too exhausted to work. They had planned this, infiltrated her most personal workspaces, and taken everything. That evening, when Daniel walked through the door, she was waiting. The air was thick with tension as she held up her laptop, the stolen files displayed on the screen. "Explain this," she demanded, her voice low but shaking with fury. Daniel's face drained of color. "Isabella, let me." "Don't lie to me," she interrupted, her voice rising. You knew they were stealing my work and you said nothing. You helped them." "I didn't," Daniel hesitated, guilt flashing across his face. "It's not what you think. This is just business, Isabella. You have to understand, my family." "Your family?" Isabella's voice broke. "What about me? What about our family?" "That project was my future, Daniel. My proof that I'm more than the girl you saved from a coffee shop. And you stole it." "I didn't steal it," he insisted, his voice rising defensively. "I used my resources to make it better, to bring it to market faster. I thought you'd be proud of what we've built." "What we've built?" Isabella's laugh was bitter, edged with heartbreak. "You mean what I built while your family plotted to tear me down?" Daniel stepped forward, but she backed away. "Isabella, you don't understand. My mother." Of course, Isabella spat, tears spilling over. "This is Eleanor's doing. She's been trying to destroy me since the day we met. But you, Daniel, you let her. You chose her over me. That's not fair. Daniel snapped, his voice filled with frustration. You don't understand the pressure I'm under. The family, the business, it's not that simple. It's simple to me, she said, her voice cold. You betrayed me. Their argument carried into the night, and when Eleanor arrived the next morning, it was clear where Daniel's loyalty lay. Isabella, Eleanor said smoothly, entering the apartment without invitation. I understand you've had some confusion about the project. Let me assure you, this is in the best interest of everyone. Get out, Isabella said, her voice trembling with barely contained rage. Eleanor smiled faintly. I think we both know that's not your decision to make anymore. What is that supposed to mean? I mean, Eleanor said, her tone saccharine, that this arrangement isn't working. Daniel agrees. The stress isn't good for you or the baby, and it's clear you need time to recalibrate. We've arranged for you to stay elsewhere. Isabella turned to Daniel, her voice cracking. You agreed to this? His silence was deafening. The final blow came when Eleanor handed her an envelope. Inside was a modest check and a note outlining the terms of her exile. This should be more than enough to start over. Away from here. Get out, Isabella whispered, her voice breaking. Both of you. Eleanor turned to leave, but Daniel hesitated. Isabella, he began, but she cut him off. Don't say anything. You've made your choice. Clutching Theo to her chest, Isabella packed what little she could carry and walked out, her tears blurring the path ahead. She didn't look back. That night, she found herself in a cramped motel room, staring at her son as he slept. Her world had crumbled, but a fire burned in her chest, a resolve that refused to be extinguished. They had taken everything from her, but they hadn't broken her. I'll show them, she whispered, her voice steely. I'll build something they can't steal. And when I rise, they'll regret the day they underestimated me. With Theo as her anchor and her ambition as her compass, Isabella vowed to fight. Not just for her career, but for her dignity, her son, and the life she knew they deserved. Isabella's life had settled into a cautious rhythm since leaving the Bradfords. Her days revolved around Theo and quietly rebuilding her career from the ashes of betrayal. Late nights at her small rented apartment were spent coding, searching for freelance gigs, and piecing together what remained of her dreams. But the bitterness of her stolen project gnawed at her, a wound that refused to heal. One evening, as Theo napped, Isabella sat scrolling through job postings when her phone buzzed with an unknown number. Isabella Miller, a smooth voice asked when she answered. Yes. Who's calling? This is David Brown. I'm Daniel's former business partner. The mention of Daniel's name sent a chill through her, but curiosity kept her from hanging up. What do you want? I know about the theft of your software, David said bluntly. And I want to help. Isabella's heart raced. Why would you help me? You're part of the same corrupt company that stole it. Not anymore, David replied, his tone sharp. I left Bradford Innovations weeks ago. I couldn't stomach their tactics any longer. Eleanor and James think they're untouchable, and Daniel, well, he's too blind to see what they've turned him into. But I'm not calling to discuss their moral failures. I'm calling because I have something you might be interested in. What's that? She asked warily. Proof, David said. Proof that your project, the software, the source code, everything was stolen and repackaged under Bradford Innovations. And as of 2 weeks ago, it's been acquired by Miller Enterprises, one of their key allies, for launch under their name. The name hit her like a slap. Miller Enterprises? As in, your family, David confirmed. They've got their hands in this too. I thought you should know. The floor seemed to drop out from under Isabella. She sank into her chair, her mind spinning. Miller Enterprises, her estranged family's corporation, had been a shadowy presence in her life for years. She distanced herself from them, seeking independence, but now they were entangled in the very theft that had upended her life. What do you want from me? Isabella asked finally, her voice trembling. A partnership, David said. I'm no saint, but I know talent when I see it. Your software is brilliant, and the world deserves to see it under your name, not theirs. I want to help you expose what they've done, but I can't do it alone. Eleanor has connections everywhere. We need to outsmart them, and I believe you're the only one who can. And why would I trust you? Isabella challenged. You were part of their inner circle. David hesitated. Because I know what it feels like to be cast aside. I was their golden boy until I started questioning their decisions. Eleanor destroyed my reputation and pushed me out of the company. I'm not asking for your trust outright. I'm asking for a chance to earn it. Isabella's mind raced. David's words rang with truth, but the stakes were high. This wasn't just about reclaiming her work. It was about taking on powerful corporations and exposing a network of deceit. If they failed, the consequences could be devastating. I'll think about it, she said finally, her voice steady. Fair enough, David replied. I'll send you everything I have on the project, the stolen files, the correspondence, everything. Look it over, and when you're ready, we'll talk about our next move. Later that night, after Theo had gone to bed, Isabella opened the email from David. Her screen filled with damning evidence, timestamps matching her original code, emails discussing the acquisition of her work, and financial records tracing payments from Bradford Innovations to Miller Enterprises. Each file was a punch to the gut, but also fuel for her growing determination. She spent hours poring over the documents, piecing together the timeline of betrayal. By dawn, her path was clear. She couldn't let them win, not the Bradfords, not her estranged family, not anyone who thought they could trample over her dreams without consequence. The next day, she called David. I'm in, she said. Let's take them down. David's voice was firm but hopeful. Then let's get to work. Together, we'll make sure the world knows the truth. Isabella hung up, a fire ignited in her chest. She wasn't just fighting for herself anymore. She was fighting for her son, her future, and the respect she had been denied for too long. It was time to reclaim her life, and she wasn't afraid to play the long game to do it. Isabella and David met for the first time at a quiet cafe far from the prying eyes of corporate informants. Their alliance was tentative but fueled by a shared determination to expose the truth. David laid out his plan over coffee, sliding a sleek tablet across the table to show Isabella the files he'd compiled. This is just the beginning, he said, tapping on the screen to display a series of emails between Eleanor Bradford and the Miller Enterprises board. They've been coordinating for months. Eleanor's assistant, Hannah, confirmed that Eleanor orchestrated the deal to sell your software to Miller Enterprises. And she's willing to testify. Hannah? Isabella asked, leaning forward. I remember her. Quiet, but she was always around. She's seen more than anyone realizes, David said. She's fed up with Eleanor's tactics and ready to speak out. But she's scared. She won't move forward unless we guarantee her safety and legal protection. Isabella nodded. I'll find a way to make sure she's protected. What else do we have? David flipped through more files. Your original files will be crucial. If you can prove the timestamps and source code align with what Bradford Innovations and Miller Enterprises are using, it'll blow their claims out of the water. I have backups, Isabella said. I've always kept copies of my work on an external drive. Good, David said. We'll need those. And I'm working on a contact at the tech blog that broke the Bradford Innovation story. If we present this right, we'll not only expose the theft, but also show the shareholders that this project was built on lies. Over the next few weeks, Isabella and David worked tirelessly. Isabella retrieved her external drive, poring over every file to ensure it was intact. Each line of code was a testament to the countless hours she had spent crafting her vision, a vision that had been stolen and twisted by people who underestimated her resolve. Meanwhile, David reached out to Hannah, meeting her in secret at a library after hours. Isabella joined them, offering Hannah reassurance as she nervously explained what she knew. I've been working for Eleanor for 6 years, Hannah said, her voice trembling. I thought she was a strong leader at first, but then I saw what she was willing to do to get what she wanted. She called it strategy, but it's really just manipulation and deceit. Hannah pulled a folder from her bag and handed it to Isabella. These are emails I intercepted. They show how Eleanor and James pressured Daniel into playing along, how they planned to strip you of any claim to the project. Isabella's hands shook as she flipped through the documents, her anger simmering. "Thank you, Hannah," she said, her voice steady. "You're brave for coming forward. I promise we'll protect you." Isabella and David knew they needed more than just documents and testimony to win. They needed allies within Miller Enterprises, people who could sway the shareholders and amplify their message. Through David's contacts, they identified a few sympathetic board members who had grown disillusioned with the company's direction. One of them, an older woman named Margaret Hall, agreed to meet Isabella and David in secret. "Eleanor Bradford has been playing dirty for years," Margaret said over a private dinner. "I've suspected as much, but this," she gestured to the evidence David had shared. "This is a new low. I'll help you, but you need to make it undeniable. The shareholders won't act unless the proof is overwhelming." "We'll make sure it is," Isabella promised. The day of the shareholders' meeting arrived, and Isabella could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on her. She dressed in a sleek black blazer and carried a small but powerful briefcase containing everything they needed: her original files, Hannah's testimony, and David's compiled evidence. David met her in the parking lot, his expression grim but resolute. "You ready?" "As ready as I'll ever be," Isabella said, gripping the briefcase tightly. The meeting room was an opulent hall filled with polished tables, leather chairs, and a crowd of well-dressed executives and investors. Eleanor and James sat at the head of the table, their expressions calm and confident. Daniel was there too, but his face was harder to read, a mix of guilt and unease. As the meeting commenced, Eleanor stood to deliver her report on Bradford Innovation's latest achievements, including the upcoming launch of the stolen software. "Before we proceed," David interrupted, rising from his seat, "we have a matter of grave importance to address." Eleanor's smile faltered, but she quickly recovered. "What are you doing, David?" David glanced at Isabella, who stood beside him. "Isabella Miller has something to share. Something the shareholders deserve to know." The room buzzed with murmurs as Isabella stepped forward, her heart pounding. "The software you're about to launch wasn't created by Bradford Innovations or Miller Enterprises. It was created by me, and I have the evidence to prove it." She placed a folder on the table, opening it to reveal the files, emails, and testimony they had painstakingly gathered. She explained each piece, her voice steady and clear, her words slicing through the room like a blade. When she finished, Hannah stood from the back of the room, trembling but resolute. "Everything Isabella said is true. I worked for Eleanor, and I saw it all. She's been lying to you." The room erupted in chaos. Some shareholders demanded answers, while others glared at Eleanor and James, their expressions dark with betrayal. Eleanor stood, her mask slipping. "This is nonsense," she snapped. A baseless attack from a disgruntled woman trying to smear our name. But Isabella was ready. She clicked a remote, and the projector behind her lit up, displaying a side-by-side comparison of her original code and the stolen version. The similarities were undeniable. Eleanor's face paled as the room turned against her. Daniel looked as though the ground had been pulled out from under him. "Isabella," he began, but she silenced him with a look. "It's too late for apologies, Daniel," she said quietly. "This is justice." As the meeting adjourned, the Bradfords' empire began to crumble. Shareholders demanded investigations, board members called for resignations, and Isabella walked out of the room with her head held high. Beside her, David smiled faintly. "You did it." "No," Isabella said, her voice firm. "We did it. Together." And for the first time in a long while, she felt like the world was finally on her side. The air in the room was electric, charged with tension as the shareholders of Miller Enterprises gathered in the opulent boardroom. Gleaming chandeliers cast harsh light over the polished mahogany table, reflecting off the eyes of those seated around it. Eleanor and James Miller, unflappable as always, sat at the head of the table, exuding an air of command and control. Daniel was by their side, his face a mask of uncertainty. Isabella entered the room with David at her side. She carried herself with quiet determination, her briefcase containing the culmination of weeks of effort and pain. She felt the weight of every betrayal, every sleepless night, and every setback, but also the fire of her resolve to set things right. Ladies and gentlemen, Eleanor began smoothly, standing to address the room. Before we begin, I'd like to extend my gratitude to all of you for your continued trust in Miller Enterprises. Today, we will discuss the upcoming launch of our groundbreaking software, which promises to revolutionize the industry. Eleanor's words were met with polite applause, but it was clear the shareholders were eager to move forward. Before Eleanor could continue, David rose from his seat. "Excuse me, Mrs. Miller," he said, his voice cutting through the room. "Before you proceed with your presentation, there's an urgent matter we need to address." Eleanor's smile faltered. "David, this is neither the time nor the place for interruptions." "Actually, it's the perfect time," David said, gesturing toward Isabella. "Because what we're about to share directly impacts the credibility of this company and its leadership." All eyes turned to Isabella as she stepped forward, her heart pounding. She met Eleanor's gaze, her own steelier than ever. "I'm Isabella Miller," she began, her voice firm but steady. "And I'm here to expose the truth about the software you're about to launch." Isabella placed a stack of documents on the table, pulling out a series of files as she spoke. "The software you've been touting as your own innovation was stolen from me. I have proof, and I'm going to walk you through it." She clicked a remote, and the projector lit up behind her. The first slide displayed two pieces of code side by side, one from her original project and one from the software Miller Enterprises was preparing to launch. "These are the source codes," she explained. "The code on the left is from my personal files, created and time-stamped over 2 years ago. The code on the right is from your version. As you can see, they're nearly identical, down to the comments I wrote for myself. The only differences are the changes made to cover up the theft, poorly, I might add." Murmurs rippled through the room. "But that's not all," Isabella continued, her voice gaining strength. "The software you stole from me has critical flaws I've already identified. If you launch it as is, it will fail. I've conducted a technical analysis and identified vulnerabilities that would cost your clients millions." She pulled up another slide, this one detailing the technical discrepancies. The room was silent except for the clicking of pens and the shuffle of papers as shareholders reviewed the evidence. Eleanor's composure was beginning to crack, but Isabella wasn't done. "I also have emails," Isabella said, pulling out printed copies and passing them around. "Emails between Eleanor and James Miller, instructing employees to access my files, copy my work, and erase any evidence of the theft. Here's one where Eleanor refers to my project as an untapped goldmine." Eleanor opened her mouth to protest, but Isabella cut her off. "And here's surveillance footage," Isabella said, clicking to the next slide. The screen displayed video from the Bradford mansion, showing a staff member handling Isabella's laptop. "This footage was taken during my time at the Bradford estate, where my laptop was accessed without my permission. That's how my files were stolen." Gasps erupted around the table as the evidence piled up. "And finally," Isabella said, turning to Eleanor, "we have testimony from your former assistant, Hannah, who witnessed your attempts to cover this up. She's prepared to speak to the authorities." Eleanor's face was pale, her hands gripping the edge of the table. James leaned forward, his voice low and dangerous. "This is outrageous. You're making baseless accusations with no context." "The context is clear," Isabella shot back. "You stole my work, you tried to erase me, and now you're trying to profit off my labor. But the truth is out, and the shareholders deserve to know exactly who they're trusting with their investments." Margaret Hall, one of the key shareholders, stood. "I think we've seen enough. This evidence is damning. I, for one, demand an immediate investigation into these allegations." Other shareholders echoed her sentiment, their voices rising in agreement. Eleanor stood, her mask of control fully slipping. "This is a smear campaign," she snapped. "A desperate attempt to undermine our success." But the room was no longer hers to command. David stepped forward. "The only thing desperate here is your attempt to hold on to power. It's over, Eleanor. The shareholders voted unanimously to suspend Eleanor and James pending a full investigation. Isabella felt a rush of vindication as security escorted the Millers from the room, their protests drowned out by the murmurs of disapproval from their former allies. Daniel approached her afterward, his face a mixture of regret and longing. Isabella, She held up a hand. Save it, Daniel. I fought too hard to let you back into my life. With that, she turned and walked out of the boardroom, her head held high. That evening, as Isabella held Theo close, she felt a profound sense of triumph. She had faced the giants of her past and emerged victorious. But this was only the beginning. Her future was hers to shape, and no one, would take it from her again. In the days following the explosive shareholders' meeting, the repercussions of Isabella's revelations reverberated through Miller Enterprises like an earthquake. The media latched onto the scandal, exposing Eleanor and James Miller's calculated theft and corporate manipulation to the public. Stock prices plummeted as calls for accountability mounted. But the most shocking twist came when Richard Miller, the family patriarch, returned from his secluded estate to address the crisis. Richard's presence was a stark contrast to Eleanor and James's polished duplicity. Though advanced in years, his sharp eyes and commanding presence reminded everyone why he had built Miller Enterprises from the ground up. He called for an emergency board meeting, and Isabella was invited to attend. Isabella, Richard greeted her with a warm handshake, his demeanor paternal but firm. I've reviewed everything. I owe you an apology for their behavior and for the years I turned a blind eye to their ambitions. I didn't expect this, Isabella said cautiously. But thank you for listening. Richard nodded. My company was founded on integrity. Somewhere along the way, that was lost. It's time we fixed it. In the boardroom, Richard's voice was resolute. Eleanor and James have betrayed the principles of this company and the trust of our shareholders. Effective immediately, they are removed from their positions and stripped of any decision-making authority. Eleanor rose from her seat, her face a mixture of disbelief and fury. You can't do this. I've dedicated my life to this company. And nearly destroyed it in the process, Richard retorted, his tone ice-cold. Your actions have tarnished our name. You have no place here anymore. James tried to speak, but Richard silenced him with a look. Your time is over. Don't make it worse for yourself. After the meeting, Daniel found Isabella in the hallway. He looked haggard, the weight of guilt etched into his features. Isabella, he began, his voice heavy, I need to say something. She crossed her arms, her expression guarded. What could you possibly say to make this right? I was a coward, Daniel admitted, his voice breaking. I let them manipulate me. I knew what they were doing, but I told myself it was out of my control, that I didn't have a choice. But I did. I chose wrong. Isabella's silence pressed on him like a physical weight. You betrayed me, she said finally. You stood by while they stole from me, humiliated me, and tried to erase me. And for what? To protect your place in their world? Daniel nodded, tears brimming in his eyes. You're right. I don't deserve your forgiveness. But I'm standing up to her now. For the first time, I told her I won't be her puppet anymore. Isabella softened slightly, though her anger still burned. That's a start, Daniel. But it doesn't undo what's been done. Eleanor's downfall was swift and unforgiving. Stripped of her influence, she was left to watch as her carefully curated empire crumbled. Her final moments at the company were unceremonious. Security escorted her from the building while the employees she once ruled over whispered behind her back. James followed shortly after, his bravado shattered as Richard dismantled his power base. Together, the two of them retreated to their mansion, their reputations in ruins and their influence extinguished. With Eleanor and James out of the picture, Richard turned to Isabella during a private meeting. You have every reason to walk away, he said. But if you're willing, I'd like your help rebuilding this company. You're exactly the kind of leader we need, someone with integrity, vision, and resilience. Isabella hesitated, thinking of all she had endured. But then she thought of Theo, of the future she wanted to build for him. I'll do it, she said finally. But on my terms. And the first step is ensuring this company supports innovation, not theft. Richard smiled. I wouldn't have it any other way. Before leaving for good, Daniel approached Isabella one last time. I hope one day you'll see me as more than the man who betrayed you, he said, his voice filled with regret. But even if you don't, I'll spend the rest of my life trying to make up for what I've done. Isabella looked at him, her emotions a whirlwind. I don't know if I can forgive you, she said honestly. But I hope you find a way to be better for yourself. With Richard's support, Isabella began the arduous process of rebuilding Miller Enterprises. She focused on fostering innovation and transparency, ensuring the company became a beacon of ethical practices. Her software was finally launched under her name, receiving acclaim from both the tech industry and the public. As she stood in her new office one evening, Theo babbling happily in his playpen, Isabella felt a sense of peace she hadn't known in years. She had fought for her dreams and her dignity, and won. For the first time in a long time, the future felt bright. The Miller Enterprises headquarters buzzed with a renewed sense of purpose. After months of restructuring, Richard Miller and Isabella had successfully overhauled the company's operations. Key to their efforts was the creation of a new division, the Ethical Innovation Initiative, a program designed to ensure transparency, fair practices, and respect for developers' rights. Isabella stood at the head of the division, her name now synonymous with integrity in the tech world. With her leadership, the company began to shift its culture, earning back trust from both its employees and the industry. During a meeting in Richard's office, Isabella presented her final terms for the division. We need to set a precedent, she said, sliding a detailed proposal across the table. Developers should retain ownership of their work unless otherwise agreed. Licensing deals, not outright acquisition, should become the standard. Richard reviewed the proposal, his expression thoughtful. You've built something remarkable, Isabella, he said. And you've forced us to confront our failures. I'll approve these terms. They'll be part of our charter moving forward. Isabella nodded, a sense of accomplishment swelling within her. This wasn't just about her anymore, it was about protecting the creativity and effort of every developer who followed. The personal chapter of her story was still unfolding. Isabella and Daniel had spent months navigating the fallout of their shattered marriage. While their love had faded, their shared commitment to their children had not. One afternoon, they sat across from each other in a mediator's office, discussing custody arrangements for their daughter, Grace, born shortly after Isabella's exile from the Bradford mansion. I want to be there for her, Daniel said, his voice steady but tinged with regret. I know I failed you, but I don't want to fail her. Isabella studied him, her emotions a mixture of lingering hurt and cautious hope. Grace deserves a father who shows up for her. If you're serious about being in her life, I'll support that. But she comes first, Daniel, always. Daniel nodded. I understand. And I'll prove to you, and to her, that I can be the father she deserves. They agreed to shared custody, ensuring that Grace would grow up surrounded by love from both parents, even if they weren't together. The Ethical Innovation Initiative flourished under Isabella's leadership. She built a diverse team of developers and engineers, many of whom had been marginalized or overlooked by the industry. The division quickly became a beacon for innovation, producing groundbreaking projects while championing fair treatment. At the division's first official launch event, Isabella stood on stage, her voice steady as she addressed the crowd. This isn't just about creating technology, it's about creating trust. We're here to show that doing the right thing and achieving success aren't mutually exclusive. The audience erupted in applause, and as Isabella stepped down from the stage, she spotted Richard in the crowd, clapping with pride. While Isabella thrived in her new role, Daniel quietly worked to rebuild his life. He stepped away from the influence of his family, taking on smaller projects and dedicating his time to self-improvement. He became an active co-parent, showing up for Grace in ways Isabella hadn't expected. From bedtime stories to school drop-offs, he embraced fatherhood with a sincerity that softened some of the walls between him and Isabella. One evening, as Daniel dropped Grace off at Isabella's apartment, he lingered for a moment. I just wanted to say thank you, he said, his voice genuine. for letting me be a part of her life, and for giving me a chance to be better. Isabella nodded. You're doing well, Daniel. Keep it up. Isabella's life was far from what she had imagined, but it was better in many ways. Her work gave her purpose, her children gave her joy, and her journey had given her strength. One night, as she rocked Grace to sleep, Isabella looked around her modest but warm home. It wasn't a mansion or a palace, but it was hers. And it was enough. She whispered to Grace, her words a quiet promise. No matter what comes next, we'll face it together. And we'll build something beautiful. As Grace's tiny hand curled around her finger, Isabella smiled. This was her new beginning, one she had earned through perseverance, resilience, and the unwavering belief in her own worth. The conference hall buzzed with energy, a space filled with the hum of innovation and possibility. Isabella stood at the podium, surveying the crowd of young developers, entrepreneurs, and dreamers who had gathered for the annual Ethical Innovation Summit. The event, now in its 5th year, had become a symbol of progress in the tech industry, a platform for those with big ideas and even bigger ambitions. As Isabella adjusted the microphone, the room fell silent. Her presence commanded attention, not because of her power or wealth, but because of the story she carried, a story of resilience, betrayal, and triumph. Welcome, she began, her voice strong but warm. When I started in this industry, I was just like many of you. I had big dreams, but no roadmap. And when I finally found my path, I learned how quickly others might try to take it from you. But here's what I want you to remember. No one can truly steal your brilliance, your passion, or your determination. Those belong to you, and they're your greatest assets. The room erupted in applause, and Isabella stepped back, smiling. She remembered her own journey, the years spent fighting for recognition, the betrayal she had endured, and the countless nights she had doubted herself. But now, standing here, she knew it had all been worth it. After the summit, Isabella lingered in the hall, greeting attendees and answering their questions. She thrived in these moments, connecting with the next generation of innovators. It was here, among the hopeful and the ambitious, that she felt her purpose most deeply. Toward the end of the evening, a young woman approached, clutching a laptop case and looking nervous but determined. "Ms. Miller," she asked hesitantly. "I'm Riley. I wanted to thank you for your speech. It really resonated with me." "Thank you, Riley," Isabella said, offering a kind smile. "What's your dream?" "I'm building a platform to connect underserved communities with educational resources," Riley said, her voice gaining confidence. "But it's been hard to get traction. Investors want quick returns, and some of the bigger companies I've pitched have started developing similar ideas after I met with them. I feel like I'm running out of time." Isabella felt a pang of recognition. "I know how that feels," she said gently. "The fear of losing control over something you've poured your heart into." Riley nodded, her eyes shining with both determination and exhaustion. "I just want to make a difference." Isabella placed a reassuring hand on Riley's shoulder. "You will. Let's sit down and talk. Show me what you've been working on." In a nearby meeting room, Riley unpacked her laptop, her hands trembling slightly as she navigated her prototype. Isabella watched intently, offering feedback and asking questions. The platform was raw but full of potential, and Riley's passion was unmistakable. "This is incredible," Isabella said after Riley finished her presentation. "You've created something that could genuinely change lives." Riley beamed, her earlier nerves dissolving. "Thank you. That means so much coming from you." Isabella leaned forward, her expression serious but encouraging. "Here's what we'll do. I'll connect you with a few investors I trust, people who care about impact, not just profit. And I'll personally mentor you through this process. Your vision deserves to be protected, and I'll make sure it is." Tears welled in Riley's eyes. "You'd do that for me?" Isabella smiled. "Someone once gave me a chance when I thought all was lost. Now, it's my turn to do the same for you." Later that night, as Isabella returned home, she reflected on how far she had come. The betrayal that had once defined her now felt like a distant echo, replaced by the pride of knowing she had built something lasting, not just for herself, but for others like her. Theo and Grace greeted her at the door, their laughter filling the air as they shared stories about their day. As she listened, she realized her greatest achievement wasn't her title or her wealth. It was the legacy she was creating, one rooted in empowerment, integrity, and the belief that no dream was too big. In her study, she placed Riley's pitch on her desk, beside a framed photo of herself holding baby Theo years ago, just after her exile from the Bradford mansion. It was a reminder of the moment she had chosen to fight, not just for her own survival, but for a world where others wouldn't have to. With a deep breath, she opened her laptop, ready to write an email introducing Riley to her network. As her fingers hovered over the keyboard, she smiled, knowing that every step she took now wasn't just hers, it was part of a path she was clearing for others. Isabella's journey had come full circle, and she wouldn't have had it any other way.